most cops, I am skeptical by nature. I've always been interested in the supernatural, and I love horror movies, but I've never seen a ghost, nor do I wish to. I never saw one the night I'm going to tell you about, but my partner did, and I trust what he told me just as I've trusted him with my life many times. No, I wasn't there for the ghost sighting, but I was there the night the ghost was made. It happened about 12 hours ago, and I clearly remember the incident because it was one of my first as a SWAT operator on a major metropolitan police department in Minnesota. It started out as a typical domestic disturbance call, but when the first patrol officers arrived, one of the male participants threatened them with a knife. A moment later, he stabbed himself and then quickly barricaded himself inside his home. In a matter of seconds, the call accelerated from a family fight to an armed, barricaded subject with hostages. That's when I was called to the scene along with the rest of the SWAT team. We quickly replaced the patrol officers and took position behind a large oak tree on the corner of the lot that allowed us to watch the front of the house and one of its sides. We held this position as an incident command post was set up, and the hostage negotiator began to communicate with the volatile man inside. In time, all of the hostages were released, and only the armed man remained in the house. Over the course of the standoff, we learned the family had been trying to do a sort of intervention on the man who was off his meds, violent and suicidal. The attempt had deteriorated, and that is when the police were called. At one point, I saw a face matching the description of the man peer out from behind the curtains covering the living room window. I radioed IC and told them I had a visual on the guy, but he had disappeared. A few minutes later, a light in a small upstairs window came on, and I radioed that in. This went on for hours. A face would appear in the window, and I'd radio it in. A light in the upstairs bathroom window would come on and then go off, and I'd radio it in. And the face would appear again in the window, and I'd radio it in. Then the light stayed on in the upstairs bathroom. We waited, but there was no further movement in the house. No more glimpses of the man's face in the window, and no more conversation between him and our negotiation team. But still, we waited. Finally, the order came from SWAT to make entry. We stacked up, streamed in, and swept one room at a time. We found the man upstairs. He was lying in the bathroom, and every square inch of its white-tiled walls and floor was dripping blood. The man had cut his neck, but by drawing the knife across the front, as is the norm, but by plunging the blade into his throat over and over. He rammed it in, pulled it out, rammed it in again, and did so until he had lost so much blood he could no longer continue. With all the connective tissue cut away, his head had flopped back like a depressed Pez dispenser. I'm sure even the veteran SWAT operators were stunned by what had to have been some kind of internal demons that drove the mentally disturbed man to do this to himself. A mere slice across the arteries would have killed him within seconds, but he had stabbed himself repeatedly until he finally succumbed to the loss of blood. We cleared the rest of the house and went back inside. IC had debriefed the family about the death, and we had no sooner exited the house than they began screaming at us. "It's your fault," they shouted. "Why did you let him die? You made him do it with your shiny guns." They were Native American people, and they commenced to chant and burn sage, an ancient ritual done to cleanse negative energy and ward off evil spirits. Why, I wondered, did they have sage with them? 10 years later, my friend, also a SWAT officer at the time of the suicide call, was now working as a canine officer. One day we were both in training, and he said, "You're never going to believe this, but B officers and I have taken numerous break-in calls at that house where the guy nearly decapitated himself." He had been repeatedly dispatched with the other officers because if the intruder were to flee, he and his canine partner would be on site to search for a trail. But every time the officers responded, there was never any indication anyone had left the house, or for that inside. One night, my friend had grown impatient with it all. "We've been here 4 times in the last 3 weeks about someone breaking in," he said to the complainant. "There is never anyone here or any sign someone entered. Why do you keep calling us?" The complainant looked embarrassed and told the officers they wouldn't believe his story. He was urged to tell them anyway. "Okay," the man said, taking a deep breath. "I'll be alone down here in the living room watching TV. The light will go on in the upstairs bathroom. When I go to check it out, there's no one there, so I turn it off and go back downstairs. Then the bathroom door will slam shut." The man took another deep breath. "I try to put it out of my head and tell myself I'm just imagining things, but then out of the corner of my eye, I'll see a guy come out of the bathroom, come down the stairs, and go behind the curtain over there by the front window. This is the same window I saw the man looking out of 10 years earlier. The upstairs bathroom is where we found him." I freak out, the complainant said, and run out of the room, but as I do, I hear the door to the upstairs bathroom slam shut again. I figured there was someone in my house messing with me, right? So I call the cops. But when you guys show up, you never find him. My friend asked the man what he knew about the history of the house. "It's been in my family for a while. I bought it from my cousin." "Listen, sir," my friend said, "no one is breaking into your house and you're not crazy, but you really need to talk to your cousin about its history. As I said in the beginning, I'm a skeptic by nature, but I still wonder about what was happening in that house. Did an evil spirit take hold of the man all those years ago? Could a possession have shown itself as a mental illness? Did a possession make him capable of such grievous harm to himself? Did the family know about it, and that's why they had the sage ready to burn at the intervention? Or if there wasn't a possession, could it be that his suicide was so violent his spirit can't move on? Or was it the moment so emotionally charged that the negative energy created by his violent death somehow burnt an image track of it in the rooms of that house? I don't know the answer to these questions. All I know for sure is that unthinkable emotional and physical violence occurred in that place, and there has been something going on in it ever since that cannot be explained." The next story is titled "The Faceless Mannequin." Being out and about at 3 a.m. is always a little unsettling, regardless of what you're doing. Writer Bram Stoker wrote, "No man knows till he has suffered from the night how sweet and dear to his heart and eye the morning can be. What makes this worse is working at an Oregon college that dates back in the 1800s. Some of the buildings are old and creaky with a history of being built over a pioneer cemetery. It was part of my job description as a public safety officer to check the buildings to ensure there was no errant student or a non-student inside causing mischief. On the night in question, I was making my rounds through all the structures when I came to a particular building that always pushed my needle deep into the red on the spine-tingling scale. It was the theater building, purchased by the university during World War II. I'm convinced there was something fundamentally not normal about all theater buildings. Google lists lots of links to haunted theaters throughout the world. Hollywood, California, of course, boasts many haunted ones, to include the tourist's popular Mann's Chinese Theater. That one tops every theater list. There were lots of things inside the old campus theater that toyed with one's imagination. Its single night light, which cast a ghostly light across its well-trodden stage. Dressing room mirrors that never failed to scare the crap out of me when my own reflection suddenly loomed in my flashlight beam. The basement with its metal operating table and a chair with binding straps on its arms, which all the officers jokingly assumed were props, and a certain area on one of the hallways that would give me chills every single time I passed through it. Creepy, yes, but mostly explainable. There were other things the officers and many students and faculty could not explain. In fact, previous experiences I had within the building encouraged my baser instincts to avoid the place altogether. One night, I didn't listen to them, though I should have. I was making my way through the theater building when I passed by a door I had never opened. There was no reason to, especially since the sign next to it indicated the room was used for storage. But this time I was curious. I unlocked ancient knob and pushed open the door to darkness. I clicked on my flashlight, and the beam fell on a black, faceless mannequin smack in the center of the room. I forced a nervous laugh, took a few deep breaths to regain control of my heartbeat, and I marveled at how one's mind can play games with. The mannequin began rotating on its metal base. "You've got to be kidding me," I blurted into the bizarre room while scooting back out into the hall. I stood motionless for a few moments, staring at several old framed pictures adorning the hallway, though not really seeing them. Then on a whim, because sometimes I just do dumb things, I retrieved my iPhone and pushed the video button. I aimed it at the aforementioned pictures for a second, and then I slowly crept back into the darkness of the strange room. I swept my flashlight to all four corners to ensure no one was in there, and then settled the beam on the mannequin. If at this point I had fully believed it had actually moved, rather than it being a trick of the light beam or my imagination, which was admittedly heightened because of the theater's built-in creep factor, I would have exited the place with extreme haste. I held my light on the featureless head for a moment as it stood mute and motionless in the seldom use and I always locked room. I smiled to myself and wondered how I could have thought a faceless, heartless, inanimate object that just happened to be shaped like a human could ever move. I'm not one to take fights fancy. I'm a veteran of war in Afghanistan, a martial artist, and a father. It was ridiculous to think. The mannequin moved again, turning ever so slowly toward me. I might have made an audible noise of some kind as my legs turned to mush. Somehow I kept my phone's camera on the thing for a few more seconds. Then I had to get out of there right that instant. I really fast walked to the nearest exit. Looking back now, I sometimes wish I hadn't recorded it, because then I could tell myself that my sleep-deprived eyes were deceiving me. But I know they weren't. The mannequin moved. But how? Was it on a moving platform of some kind? If so, why wasn't it continuously rotating? And how would it have been powered? And if it were, and I know in my gut it wasn't, why would it be powered at all, since it was locked inside of a storeroom for I don't know how long? Might a student have played a prank on a poor campus cop? What an elaborate mission that would be. They would have to somehow gain entry to the locked room and then wait some more, never knowing if this would be the one time, the only time, I would look into the room, or, for that matter, if I would even be checking the theater that night. It was a very long time before I went into the room again, and by then the mannequin had been moved to some other location. Hell, maybe it moved there all by itself. Editor's note: I saw the video and it was disturbingly creepy. The next story is titled White Eagle. Back in the late 1970s, there was an old tavern in my beat in Portland with a rich history of sordidness and violence. The tavern was a stone's throw from the railroad, which was another stone's throw from the mighty Willamette River. In the late 1800s, through the first few decades of the 1900s, ship workers, railroad men, drifters, prostitutes, and criminals of every ilk kept things rootin' and tootin' bleeding in the place. The basement and second floor were used for prostitution and opium smoking. Asian and black female prostitutes were kept in the basement. Some purportedly were never allowed to leave. The 13 rooms on the second floor gave customers and prostitutes more privacy. A woman named Rose was murdered by a jealous brothel manager up there, and people were reported smelling odors of wafting perfume, hearing a woman cry and other strange noises, and seeing a face at the upstairs window when no one was on the second floor. My partner Bill knew the manager, and we'd swing by once in a while to have coffee with him before he opened up. The first time I met him, he was sweeping the sidewalk in front of the pub, a deep worry frown creasing his forehead. "What's happening, Dan?" Bill asked. After pulling us to the curb, the two of them exchanged friendly takes for a minute before Dan asked us to come in for coffee. The two-story structure was long and rectangular, with empty lots on each side of it. There were other buildings next to it at one time, possibly attached, but the and they still are today. There were only 3 of us in the place that morning as we sat around a table next to a long bar. Chairs had been set beside down on all the other tables so that Dan, still looking as if something was bothering him, could clean the floor. We chatted for a while, and when I asked something about the place, he frowned again and began fiddling mindlessly with a salt shaker. Sometimes in the morning, he said, his eyes still in the shaker, the chairs aren't where I left them the night before. We looked at him. He looked a little uncomfortable, as if he wished he could withdraw his words. He stood and reached for his broom where he had left it propped against another table. You can't leave it at that, Dan. No one works at night, he said, moving his broom around, though he had already swept the floor. No cleaning crew, no anyone. Any sign of forced entry, I asked. He shook his head. It's happened before, too. Sometimes the chairs have been removed from the tops of the tables, and sometimes they're all pushed into that far corner over there. One time they were scattered all about the floor. McNamann's is a popular chain of over 65 pubs and hotels throughout Oregon and Washington. They buy old and unique buildings, schools, and hotels, add multiple themed pubs within a single sprawling complex, along with theaters and gift shops, and fill all available spaces with antique art. Several of their pubs and hotels have been declared haunted by paranormal investigators and written about in articles, books, and blogs. White Eagle is a relatively small pub they bought in 1993. Still, it's mentioned in nearly every story about haunted locations in Oregon. In recent years, psychics have reported feeling a powerful sense of violence and death in the basement area, and witnesses say they have seen floating brooms and mops. One employee felt hands push her down the stairs. I have perceived a weird vibe in the place those many years ago, a mild sense of something out of the norm. Dan's story about moving furniture seemed fitting to what I was feeling. I have been to the White Eagle a few times in the last few years, and while I had read about recent paranormal activity in the place, I didn't get that same vibe I did 3 decades ago. Maybe whatever it is was gone now, or maybe, as has happened in other haunted places, it is laying low for a while and will return on its own schedule at night in the dark. This is where I'm going to leave you guys now. I hope you enjoyed